Hello and welcome to today's KDP University's At Home with Melody Godfred. I'm Trisha, and for the past 5 years, I've moved around Amazon's books teams, learning the business so I can share it with authors. Prior to coming to Amazon, I worked as a graphic artist, project manager, and educator. But we're here to talk to Melody. Melody Godfred is an author, speaker, and entrepreneur dedicated to inspiring transformative growth in people across the globe. In 2016, Godfred founded Fred and Far to empower women to choose themselves by practicing self-love and self-care. Her sisterhood has since reached women in over 40 countries. Since then, she's authored 3 books, including Amazon best-selling Self-Love Poetry for Thinkers and Feelers, and The ABCs of Self-Love, which is a workbook designed to make self-care more accessible. Godfred is also the founder of Write in Color, a leading personal branding and career development company. She loves to connect with her readers on Instagram, where she's achieved millions of impressions thanks to her ability to make readers feel seen and known while reshaping self-love, our worth, and happiness. Welcome, Melody.
Hi, Trisha.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time to share all this wonderful knowledge with us.
It's truly my pleasure.
Good. Well, let's start out by talking a little bit about how you became an author.
So the seeds of me being an author were planted really early. When I was a child, writing poetry and music was my avenue towards self-expression and also how I made sense of the world around me. Of course, as I grew up, it felt like you can't be a creative, you have to do something practical. And that was the messaging that I was getting both internally and from the world. And so I took the practical path and became a litigation attorney. And when I reached the pinnacle of that career, I realized I had left myself behind. And that's when I returned to writing and published my first novel, The Agency, through KDP. And I've been writing in different formats ever since.
Wonderful. So The Agency, was that fiction, nonfiction?
It was a fiction thriller about a woman who is an agent in Hollywood, but is an undercover CIA operative. And her job was to create entertainment scandals that distract the public from politics. So I wrote that in 2009. I think I was a little bit ahead of my time. Because we all see the intersection of entertainment, media, and politics. But writing that book was really cathartic because I realized what it took for me to feel alive in my work. And that's not something I had in my prior career as a lawyer.
Now, you didn't stay with fiction, so a lot of what you're known for isn't actually fiction, is that correct?
Yes, that's true. I actually haven't published anything in fiction in over 10 years. I've since transitioned into self-help and most recently poetry, which is ultimately, I think, where it all started for me as a child. And it's interesting that this is where I'm experiencing my greatest success as a writer, is in the content that is most authentic to me and most known to me.
I think that that's a great call out, and that's something that we hear frequently from authors, is when they really follow their passion and their true calling is when they start finding that success, because that comes through to your audience.
Absolutely. I think that there is this idea that your calling should feel effortless. I don't think that's true. I think it requires a tremendous amount of work to discover and honor who you are. But once you, the feeling that you get feels very right. And in that regard, it's truly weightless, and it takes the pressure off that oftentimes comes with deciding what you're going to do with your life.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference in writing fiction and writing nonfiction? Right. So I think that that's something that authors sometimes struggle with, that transition.
So I think for me, the through line in all my writing is the emotional aspect of what I'm writing. I always try to use a sensory experience in terms of how I write to evoke a connection with my reader. And that was true both in my fiction writing and also in my nonfiction writing. I do think that the key to good nonfiction writing is to engage someone's heart in addition to their mind, because oftentimes very easy to limit yourself to being very intellectual and trying to make a practical connection. But when you can get someone's heart, that's when you can really hook them.
So why did you decide to make that transition into the, dare I say, self-help world?
I think it came of doing the work myself in growing as an individual. When I wrote my first book, I was early in my career. I wasn't, I was newly married or just getting married at that time. I didn't have kids. I didn't have my own business. And in the 10 years between my first book and my second, all of those things happened. And I had to grow as a person in order to be able to juggle motherhood, entrepreneurship, and all the other things that come with life when you transition from your 20s into your 30s and then from your 30s into your 40s. And so I decided, you know what, I've learned a lot in this journey. Maybe I can help other people through what I've learned. And that was really the seed of the transition, both in terms of my writing and also my career in terms of the businesses I started.
So with the poetry, you just mentioned the fact that you've released poetry now. That's even a another departure. So can you talk a little bit about that process?
Yeah. So I started a company in 2016 called Fred and Far. It's a self-love movement powered by one ring, the self-love pinky ring. And the idea is that if women have a reminder to choose themselves every day and to practice self-love and care, then they can claim their wholeness and worth. And that's something that I struggled with, especially as a new mom, and having this symbol made a big difference for me. But what I found is that asking someone to choose themselves and not showing them how doesn't actually create the transformative change that I'm interested in. And so in an effort to inspire and engage my community, I started writing poetry on Instagram every day to illustrate what it means to choose yourself. What does self-care look like? What does wholeness even mean? And it was those bite-sized pieces of inspirational poetry that ultimately became the foundation for my book, Self-Love Poetry, which contains 100 pairs of poems, so 200 poems total, where each poem pair speaks to a central theme related to self-love. The left side speaks to right brain thinkers, so it's a more analytical gut punch of a poem, and the right side speaks to right brain feelers, so people who really feel their way through life. And it was really just born of my desire to not only understand and express myself, but use that to help other people do the same.
Really inspirational, and we appreciate that, because I think, to your point, so often women sacrifice who they are, for their business as well as for their family, and we definitely push our needs down. So this is truly inspiring, and I thank you for that.
It really is something that is ingrained in us, the idea that to sacrifice is feminine. And I've really devoted the last 5 years of my life to challenging that notion.
So let's talk about the path of you. So you've published fiction, you've published nonfiction, you've published poetry. Let's talk a little bit, let's get into the business aspect and talk a little bit about what it means to market and become successful, writing those, and your journey as far as being able to publish and become noticed or have your content noticed. What's the big difference?
So I joke that I'm a 10-year overnight success, because when I published Self-Love Poetry, it was instantly a #1 new release and a bestseller, and has remained a bestseller for the past 6 months. And we all think that that's how it happens. You just put it out there and it's good, so people will buy it and you're going to be a superstar. But that's not actually the case. I think that for any author these days, whether you're self-published or traditionally published, you have to be a strategic thinker. You have to be a marketer. You have to build a community that's interested and aligned with the content that you're passionate about writing. And that's what I would say is the biggest difference throughout my career so far as a self-published author. Is before I published self-love poetry, I spent 5 years testing these poems out on people who enjoyed them and refining my style and seeing really clearly like what works, what doesn't work, and also building up an email list and building up a social media following, and also educating myself about how do you stand out on a platform as vast as Amazon? Because, and you can correct me, I imagine that there are like millions of books. You know, you're not up against one or two books. And how do you stand out? So educating myself about the data aspect of launching on KDP, you know, how you title your book description, your book categories, the day that you launch, how many sales you can generate on that day. These are all things that you can do to help your book thrive, because it goes well beyond just the value of the book, which is valuable regardless of anyone seeing or finding it. But if you want to really connect, I think doing that legwork up front and being strategic about your community building and launch, at least in my case, made a tremendous difference.
So let's break that down a little bit, because I think that that's completely accurate. That there is no such thing as an overnight success. And although it seems from the audience as an overnight success, to your point, it's taken many years to build this. So brand new, where did you start? Like where was the first place that you started when you started in this journey?
So when I first wanted to write a book, I had just quit a lucrative job. Everyone thought I was crazy. And I had to do something to prove to myself that this was real. And so I actually started my book journey through NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month. It takes place every October, and people around the world commit to writing a book in 30 days. And what I learned from that experience is that in order to write, you cannot edit. You have to write and release yourself from all self-judgment and get the words on the page. And then from there, you can do anything you want afterwards to make what you wrote better. And that was the foundation of my first book, and has really informed all of my writing since then. To be a writer, you have to write. There is no such thing as an aspiring writer. And in this case, to be a published author, you have to publish. And KDP, for me, opened that door. But I would say the first thing I did was I wrote the book. And then from there, I would say the next things I did, in addition to editing it and refining it, I worked with an illustrator to create really compelling covers, which I think makes a tremendous difference. And I learned through trial and error. With my second book, I designed a cover and published it. And only when I saw the thumbnail did I realize that the text was so small that no one could read it. And even though it was artistic and beautiful, it was white. So it just completely disappeared into the, digest view of the books on Amazon. And so being open to trial and error, nothing needs to be forever. So with both my first and second book, I updated my book covers when I realized they weren't working. So being flexible and also working with professionals and creating, a cover that will stand its own against covers that were put together by marketing teams. And then once you have the interior and you have the cover, doing research online, and there are so many wonderful resources around this. Specifically, I really like the Kindlepreneur newsletter, provides really incredible information, also the Publisher Rocket software. These two tools helped me understand how to write my product description and how to pick my product categories. Because if you just pick, like nonfiction poetry, that's a very broad category and it's hard to stand out. But with those tools, you can actually see how many people are using this category, what is the competition, how many books do I need to sell to actually be a bestseller. And so I did all of that legwork. And then from there, if ads are something you're interested in running, Amazon makes it really easy to run ads for your books. And there are multiple ad schools online. I personally use Brian Cohen's Ad School, which is a free 5-day advertising kind of webinar. And it made me feel empowered to get eyeballs on my book that weren't necessarily built from my own community. And it all works together. I think once you get going, you just continually refine your marketing strategy and own your book. And you can't be afraid to promote yourself, which is something I think we're all getting a little more used to.
Right, right. So I'm going to jump back to NaNoWriMo just a minute, because we talk and we hear frequently that you need to have that community. And for people that are just getting started to writing and they need that little extra push and that community, NaNoWriMo is a great place for that. We're a huge proponent of NaNoWriMo and a sponsor for them. We love absolutely what they stand for. So I'm so glad to hear that you found that successful and rewarding.
I did, very much so. It got me across the finish line, having that community and that encouragement, and also the permission to write. I think that was something that NaNoWriMo gave me, that you don't have to have an English degree. You don't have to be a full-time writer. You don't have to have the acceptance of an agent or a publisher to earn the right to write.
Exactly, exactly. Now, the other thing that I know that you've put a lot of work into is building your social media following. So I wanted to spend some time talking about your social media strategy and how you built that.
So social media is a funny thing. I think in a lot of ways it gets a very bad rap because people say that it's not real and it creates unnecessary pressure. For me, I've looked at it the opposite way. It's an avenue for me to connect with people around the world and to be myself. And I have found that successful posts are when I am most authentic, either in terms of the kind of photo I'm sharing or the kind of story I'm sharing. You know, I shared a bit about my author journey just yesterday, and people were really happy to hear that message that I'm not an overnight success. And I would say that if you're growing your following, the two things you can do, three things. The first thing is be authentic. Tell your story as it is. Don't be afraid to show yourself. Don't hide. The second thing I'll say is create some consistency so that your audience knows what to expect from you. This is both in terms of the cadence of how often you post, when you post, and what you post. And the third thing I'll say is there are so many tools now that make it easier than ever to be a content creator. I even use Instagram stories itself to create a lot of my posts for the feed, the typography. You can use Canva. You don't need to be a graphic designer, but spend a moment and think about what you want your personal brand to be. And your personal brand is how you make people feel. It's not a specific font. It's not a specific color. It's the feeling someone gets when they walk away from engaging with you. Once you can identify what that feeling is, there are so many free tools that you can use to bring that feeling to life. And in my case, I've done that by using, for example, a typewriter font when I share certain poems, or using a pink and red color scheme because those are my brand colors. And then just being consistent about what I post so that anytime someone's scrolling through their feed, they know when it's me and they want to be part of my journey.
So so you've mentioned Instagram. Do you post on any other social media sites?
So I do cross post on Facebook and Pinterest. I have definitely signed up for Clubhouse and TikTok. I have not used them. I think this is partially me being anxious about taking something new, but it's also about me realizing like what my comfort level is. And I think there's a lot of pressure to be everything everywhere to everyone. And goes well beyond social media. I think this is a general pressure we all feel. I would urge everyone to just pick one place where you're comfortable and be awesome at it. It could be on YouTube with YouTube videos. It could be on Twitter. It could be anywhere, but pick one place and start from there. And then once you have your identity in place and you feel comfortable sharing it, then you can go and expand to other platforms, which is something I'm hoping to do a little bit more of this year.
I think that's a great call. A couple of things. One, definitely be authentic. It's too exhausting to try to be somebody else. And then, bite-sized chunks, one at a time. I think we all like to do all the things immediately, and that's where it becomes challenging. Totally
Yeah.
agree with that. So did you just start growing? Did it just start growing organically then when you were posting and then all of a sudden people were finding it and just following you? Or did you do anything to build that social following?
It's all happened organically. I haven't used
Hmm.
any bots or services. Um,
Hmm.
Things that have happened to me that I think are the result of just continually showing up and sharing.
Hmm.
When I first created my business, Fred and Far, and I created the Self-Love Pinky Ring, it was a really novel idea, the idea that a woman should choose herself regardless of her marital status or station in life. And that resonated. So I got a lot of organic press around the world without a PR team. And that I think
Hmm.
gave me a foundation in terms of my following. And then also, most recently, this past Thanksgiving, a poem I had written during the pandemic was picked up by Oprah Magazine and then went viral again.
Hmm.
And it probably
Hmm.
got a million impressions. The poem said, "I thought 2020 would be the year I got everything I wanted. Now I know 2020 is the year I appreciate everything I have." And that was what I had to write to survive the pandemic because I
Hmm.
needed to shift my thinking around the moment I was living through. And
Hmm.
it resonated so deeply. And right around Thanksgiving and the New Year, it was the perfect message for the season. And
Hmm.
so I got really lucky. Lucky in terms, luck is doing you and putting it
Yeah.
out in the world and knowing that the right people will connect with you if you keep showing up. That is luck. So I got very
Yes.
lucky. And Oprah, Brene Brown, Kim Kardashian, Hoda, the Today Show did a segment on it. And that was
Uh-huh.
all about any PR or marketing. That was just me being me and putting it out into the world. And everyone
Hmm.
has that opportunity. And I think that's one thing that really empowers authors today that maybe didn't exist 10, 20, 30 years ago is you have
Hmm.
a audience. All you have to do is connect.
Hmm. And I think it's timely to remind everybody that luck took 10 years, right? So this was 10 years worth of work for that
Yeah.
luck to happen, So I don't see that as luck. I see that as really hard work paying off.
That's why I got nervous even using that word because luck feels like something that's divinely ordained and has nothing to do
Hmm.
with us. But I will say that for me, anytime I trust my intuition, the part of me that knows what's right for me,
Hmm.
good come. And that is the alignment, alignment
Hmm.
between who we are and how we live. And poetry for me and writing poetry has been that alignment as an author that maybe
Hmm.
was hurting me a little bit in my prior work. But I'll tell you, I am just as proud as my first book as I am of my third. And
Hmm.
I'm, witnessing my own evolution and appreciating it and going with it and flowing with it. And I'm
Hmm.
excited to see what comes next.
We are too. So let's talk a little bit about advertising. So with the launch, you mentioned that you use advertising. You mentioned Amazon advertising specifically. Did you do any other advertising as well, or just Amazon?
No, I also do Facebook advertising. So what's funny about self-love poetry is the first few months I didn't do any advertising at all. I'd say the first 3 months I let it run organically. And then I thought, let's experiment and see what we can do. And so I
Hmm.
did tests with Facebook and also directly within Amazon. And then I continue also to share my book regularly on my organic channels. And I think that what you need to do is ultimately be very mindful of what happens next because advertising and even just the organic reach of my book brings new people into my community. So when
Hmm.
they post, I respond to them. When they DM me, I respond to them. I appreciate them. I share the content that they create around my book. I'm constantly looking around on the web to see what's happening and engaging
Hmm.
so that people feel connected not just to my book, but also to me.
Hmm. So that takes a lot of time. Do you have a team that helps you out, or is it just you?
So right now it's pretty much just me.
Uh-huh.
I have 3 kids, so it's busy. It's very busy.
Yeah.
I do have a few consultants that I work with as vendors who are amazing. And one thing that I've learned is the best thing you can do instead of just trying to grow your own team in-house is find people who are experts and have them consult. I think
Hmm.
there's a lot of pressure when you want to be an entrepreneur to have funding and to grow this massive team and have all these resources, but you can actually do it in a very lean way and
Hmm.
grow as you grow. And
Right.
so I do, like, for example, with social media, I post everything myself, everything that's organic, I do on my own. But when it comes to Facebook ads, I have a consultant, or Amazon ads, I have a consultant who manages those campaigns for me.
Okay. Okay. But it took you, you didn't have that initially. How long did it take you before you reached out and kind of started working with a consultant?
Um, well, I started writing in 2009. I didn't actually do any advertising around my books until probably 2019. So it took about
Gotcha.
10 years. And
Yeah.
even when I first started, I did a lot of it myself. Like I didn't start having anyone help with Amazon ads until 2021. I was
Hmm.
doing that on my own. So it's been a slow burn, and
Yeah.
it also has a lot to do with my comfort level, just
Hmm.
making sure that I'm always comfortable with what I'm investing. And, these platforms make it very easy to understand what you're spending and what your return is. And it
Hmm.
makes scaling something you actually have control over, as opposed to in the past where you maybe had to hire an agency who charged you a really
Hmm.
large retainer. Those barriers to entry are receding. And even
Hmm.
with KDP, I think there's this idea that even if you want to self-publish, you have to spend thousands upon thousands of dollars in order to get your book up. And I did invest in my book, both in terms of my time and also hiring someone to, compile my work and edit it and a cover designer. So it's not without expense, but the expense is far less than I think people would think it would be.
Hmm. Right. So publishing on the site is it's free, but
Yes.
to your point, making smart choices and wise investments in certain areas like the cover, or to your point, poetry is hard to format. So investing in formatting with somebody who knows, how to do that, it makes sense. All right. So if you're okay with it, we've got some questions coming in. I'm seeing all these questions coming in, and I'm dying to start asking some of them. So if you don't mind, um, Judy wants to know how you found your consultants.
Through networking primarily. I have found that the best people to work with are referrals. And so I'm
Mhm.
part of several Facebook groups, both for authors and entrepreneurs. That's a really great place to start. I also believe in building your LinkedIn network. Um,
Mhm.
LinkedIn is a social platform that people thought, oh, it's just for getting a job. It's really for so much
Mhm.
more than that. So I would say, looking to Facebook groups and LinkedIn, and also just speaking with your peers and building relationships is a really great way to find a trusted referral. I've tried people in the past where I found them through an ad or just, randomly, and the experience was not positive for me.
Okay. So again, trial and error,
Mhm.
but having that community, I think, is one step that really helps get going.
Yeah.
Okay.
I told you my
Um,
fail, fail again, fail better. That's
right.
mantra.
Yeah, I think that's definitely, it's not a failure if you learn from it and are able to apply it to the next step. But
Yes.
yeah, to your point, definitely loads of failure that come with success. Um, so we have a question. I'm interested to know about your approach in dealing with self-love and self-care. So we've kind of talked around this a little bit, but I think that this is interesting. It's not directly related to publishing, but um, what can you share some of the things that you talk about?
So for me, self-love is a commitment to authenticity above everything else. I am
Hmm.
someone who's highly sensitive, And for most of my life, I always had shame around that. Like, oh, I'm just too sensitive. I'm too empathetic. Every aspect of my life that related to that, I was like, that's not good. And I would bottle myself up. Whereas now I've learned that those things are my superpowers. That sensitivity is what allows me to write poetry that resonates with other people so deeply. And for me, self-love was about recognizing who I am first and foremost, and then building a life around that that isn't in conflict with who I am. And that is where self-care comes in. How do I nurture myself, and how do I make sure that I am connected with my thinking, my feeling, and my experience living in the world? And ultimately, for me, when you are authentic and you nurture your authentic self, you get a sense of wholeness where you go into the world without feeling guilt or shame or resentment, because you're actually in alignment. And from there, you can build relationships with other people that are healthy. And that is ultimately what self-love is about. It's about having a healthy relationship with yourself and with your world. And everything I've done in my work for the past 5 years has been devoted to helping other people go through that journey every single day.
That's amazing. Thank you. We have some questions around newsletters. Do you use a newsletter?
I do. So I've been using MailChimp since I started my business. And if there's one thing my advertising consultant consistently tells me, it's that I'm not sending enough newsletters. I send, at least 1 or 2 a week now, and it's always with a little bit of shame. And shame is something I work really hard not to feel, but I always feel like, oh my God, I'm bothering someone, like by emailing them, like, why am I bombarding their inbox? But everyone's happy when I send newsletters because they want to be part of my community. And it's about understanding someone who is on your list is there for a reason. And if you're providing value and it's not just selling all the time, that they're actually benefiting from being on your list. So I think email is incredibly important. Using social or a personal website to drive email signups is really important, because ultimately that is the only way to connect with your consumer that you control. Even Amazon, for example, and I would love for you, Tricia, to go talk to the people upstairs and work on this. You don't know who your customer is.
Right.
And so you can't connect with them directly. You literally have no way. So if you're not building your own community, especially through an email list, there's always going to be a barrier between you and your audience. And my email list played a huge role in my launch, letting people know on this day my book is launching, please buy it on the first day, is what helped it become a best new release. And you can't do that if you don't have a direct line to your community.
Right. And to your point, one thing I will tell the entire audience is we love the feedback that you just gave, because this does go somewhere. We talk to people about this, and the feedback helps us make changes to the website to accommodate. And the other thing that I would say is, I think right now the only way to go ahead and email people is if they follow you on Amazon Author Central. So if you're part of Amazon Author Central, you didn't know that?
No, I can email people?
Yes.
Wow.
So not directly, but what happens is if they follow you on Amazon Author Central, when you do new releases, then it gets sent out, but you can also link it to your blog.
Okay. That's exciting.
There you go. There's my tip for the day.
Thank you.
All right. So we've got some questions about, what does your day look like? Do you write every day? Do you have a schedule? What does that look like for you?
So it's taken me a long time to get to a place where I have a schedule, and it has been the most liberating thing ever. I used to be someone who just floated around from urgency to urgency, and whatever was the loudest is what got my attention. And now I've shifted away from that. So my schedule is Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. I work out of a home office where I am separated from my family. And in that time, I break up my day between operational tasks that I need to do to run my business, whether that's responding to customer service, doing product development, fulfilling orders. I mean, there's a whole host of things that I do in that regard. But then there's also a good chunk of the day that's devoted to thinking and creating, whether that's writing a poem or creating social media content. I tend to create and share on a daily basis. I'm not banking huge amounts of content in advance, because as I feel it, that's when I'm inspired to share it. But I do think it's important to make writing a habitual commitment. So if I just waited to be divinely inspired, that might not happen for a week. But if I carve out that time every day and say, okay, I'm going to feel what's going on with me today and see what creativity comes of that, then I'm able to post something every day that is not only authentic to me, but that's also timely to the world and to my community. And that's why I think a lot of my content last year during the pandemic went viral, because I was writing about what we were all collectively feeling in that moment. But that wouldn't have happened if I didn't make space to explore and create. So that is my schedule. And then Tuesdays and Thursdays, I put my mom hat on and try to get in the creativity and work where I can. But those are my mom days.
Gotcha. Nice balance. I think that that's important too, especially when you're doing such creative work like poetry.
Yeah.
So we have a question that I think kind of piggybacks off of what you were just talking about. Do you ever get stuck and feel like you can't do this? How do you pull yourself out of that place?
Like literally 2 days ago, I was coming back after a week of spring break with my kids, and I just felt utterly overwhelmed. There was too much to do. It felt like I was rolling a rock up a hill. I felt like a complete failure. Like there's so much opportunity. I'm messing it all up. And that, as a sensitive person who has very high expectations of myself, that comes sometimes. And for me, and this sounds so cliche, like you have to root yourself in gratitude. Sometimes it takes being like, no, I'm going to stop and write down 20 things that I've accomplished, even in this moment, feeling like a total failure. And that could be like, I woke up today and I brushed my hair. It could be something so small, but having gratitude for yourself and the things that you've done helps reframe your brain. And also just realizing, and this is something that took me a long time and work with a therapist to realize, what happens to us isn't always within our hands, but how we think about it completely is. So when I see myself spiraling, it's usually just a bad thought pattern. And so I catch it and I take a breath and I challenge myself, okay, how can I reframe this? And it's actually something I'm going to be exploring in my next book. And it's the idea of the shift. How do we catch the thought and think about it in a different way?
I love that. I think that's something that I work with my children on all the time is, it's like if you don't like the view, you need to just walk around and change it. And all of a sudden it's very different.
Yeah.
Book reviews. Those are a big topic. Everybody loves to talk about book reviews. How important are those to you? And do you use them in different ways?
So being that I have not sought out any, I will tell you that they have not inhibited my growth and success. I do think they're important. And this is, again, as one person, there's only so much I can do. That being said, and we haven't touched on this yet, I did want to share that I was noticed by a publisher because of my success on Amazon. And we are in the final stages of a publishing deal, which is really exciting and just shows that anything is possible when you commit to your craft. And I'm excited with them not only to have more of a global presence, but also to do a little bit more of the things around book promotion that I just simply don't have the bandwidth to do. Book reviews being one of them.
Okay, good. I wasn't sure that we were talking about that, but now that you brought it up, congratulations. I know that's exciting. A lot of authors kind of in that position where you are right now some of them choose to stay with self-publishing, and some of them choose to do exactly what you're doing and go into traditional publishing. What helped you make that decision?
So I spent, you know, 3, 4 months deliberating this, because it's interesting how something you wanted at one point of in time, you finally get it, and then you're like, wait, do I want this anymore? You know, when I first wrote my book in 2009, The Agency, I went out to 70 agents and publishers, and no one cared. And then this round, I have an agent, I have a publisher who's interested, and I had to really think about, like, when I envision my future, what it looks like. And one thing that I've realized is really important for me is, as I go through the next decade of my life, I'd like to be more of a specialist. I'd really like to focus on my superpower. And my superpower is writing. That is where I know that I am the most alive. I do my best work, and I can create the greatest imprint on the world and be of service, is through writing. It is not through distributing, editing, marketing, you know, all the things that go into being a successful self-published author. Those are all things I've done so far, in addition to having an e-commerce business where I sell jewelry, in addition to having a writing company that I was also running full-time, writing, you know, career development content for individuals up until 2 months ago. For a long time, I've tried to do it all. And when I really sat with myself and envisioned my future, I'd like to do a little bit less. And that really informed my decision. The publisher that I'm going to be working with is an expert #1 publisher of my genre. They are every big name Instagram born poet that you know of is through this publisher. So I'm excited to work with an expert and trust them to do all the work to help me gain a larger, more global audience, so that I can focus more on writing. And that really informed my decision, was just figuring out, what do I want to do, and what is the best partnership for me to explore to get there.
And I think that that's an amazing call out, is recognizing where you want to spend your time. Because if you know, we talked a little bit earlier, a little bit about burnout. And if you are feeling all that pressure and you're not focused on what you really truly is your calling, that can be a challenge.
And you know, for me, you bring up burnout. In 2019, I had to take a 6-month mental health break. I paused my business completely. I was completely burnt out. I didn't know what was going to come next. And what ended up coming next is that 6-month period is when I started writing the best poetry of my life, is when I had a few less plates spinning in the air and I was really able to focus. And that was a gift. Like, I thought it was desperation and just reaching the end of my rope, but that break really opened the door to the next chapter of my life. And I urge everyone to do the work of realizing we are all one of one among billions of people, past, present, and future. We are without replica. There has to be a reason. And I think that once you realize what your reason is, what is the reason you're here, your purpose, how are you going to make an imprint on the world that no one else can? Once you know what that is, you owe it to yourself to carve out time for it and honor it. And for me, that's what I'm trying to do now as an author, because this is my moment to be me and make my contribution. So I'm excited to lean into it.
Amazing. And we appreciate it too. So we have a question. This is really interesting. When sharing on social media, how did you handle the fear that people might steal it? Was that a concern?
This is an amazing point. People have stolen it a lot. And even this quote that went viral that I was speaking about around Thanksgiving, I first shared it in maybe July. And at that time, I didn't put my name on my quotes. So someone took my quote. I had my initials on it. They took my initial off. It went viral the first time, to the point where Khloe Kardashian posted a somebody wrote an article that Khloe Kardashian posted this quote and there was no attribution. And when that happened, I was devastated.
Yeah.
But I didn't stop. I kept creating. And ultimately, the next time around, someone was inspired by that by that quote. I was able to get credit, and it led to like an avalanche of sharing that was even bigger. And I did spend time when it went viral that second time, reaching out to accounts and making sure there was credit. But I also
Mm-hmm.
had understanding that to create is to create. It
Mm-hmm.
is not about what happens after that. And ultimately, like no one can copy who I am, even if they
Mm-hmm.
copy a specific quote and they don't give me attribution. Every time I write, I'm investing in my craft and myself and my voice. And that is why I'm here today. And that's why I have this poetry book. If I had stopped the first time someone stole one of my quotes, then
Mm-hmm.
I literally wouldn't be here today.
Mm-hmm.
So I will also say that having created the self-love pinky ring, many people have also tried to steal that, and no one does it the way I do it. No one gives my customers the feeling I give them because it's not authentic to anyone else. It's only authentic to me. Someone who's
Mm-hmm.
copy doesn't have that emotional investment and commitment to what it is that is being created, and people
Mm-hmm.
feel that. You know, people feel the difference between a creator account and a meme account that just reposts
Mm-hmm.
other people's content. So what I would say is give it away. Whatever you're creating, put it out there. You are the only one standing in the way of your work being recognized. If you hide
Mm-hmm.
it, then you're hiding it. And I don't think
Yeah.
anything comes of that.
Agreed. Audible books, and it's really interesting to talk about, audiobooks for poetry, especially. Have you looked into doing an audiobook, or is there an audiobook for your?
So there actually will be through this new publishing deal. That was another big reason why I wanted to do it. And I did ask them to be the one to voice it.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up as a singer and a speaker, and so for me to be able to voice my poetry is so deeply fulfilling, and it brings me full circle in so many ways. So I
Uh-huh.
think that that's a really important piece, and it's been interesting watching my community and even strangers create TikToks where they're reading my poetry out loud. Because you would think that it's kind of awkward to read it out loud, but it is so beautiful to hear the power in someone's voice when they're reading a poem about self-love. And I'm
Uh-huh.
excited, delve into that Audible experience and share it.
Sorry, everybody's asking about things that we've talked about, especially they're very interested in social media. Um,
I can speak more to that. It's a hard time to grow organically. It's just the truth. It is
mhm,
something that, the platforms early on make it easier to gain exposure organically. And then as they monetize, they want you to monetize your efforts. I will say that the best thing you can do with social media is always be on the cutting edge and use whatever
mhm.
the newest tools are. So if you're on Instagram, you should be using Reels, and please teach me how to use them when you figure it out. Uh, but really, like they are promoting Reels and people are experiencing explosive organic growth. So take the time to learn the newest thing, whether it's Reels
Mhm.
or Instagram Lives or IGTV. Like I've posted a few IGTVs and people contact me about them months later. There's some
Mhm.
longevity to certain elements of all of these platforms. YouTube is another great place to create longevity and also be really smart about your keyword strategy, because you come up in search in a way that you
Mhm.
probably wouldn't on Instagram. So I think being strategic about what you're using when you're sharing is just as important about being authentic in what you're sharing.
Mhm.
And I think if you look around, the accounts that are growing are the ones that are doing that. They're using the latest things, they're engaging with the people who comment and share their content, and they're showing up every day, even when it's hard, even when you think you don't have anything to share. I would say try to post at least once a day and be
Mhm.
consistent.
Agreed. I think that that consistency part is definitely a good tip because people have short memories on social media. So if you don't post on a regular cadence, it's easy for them to find someone else to follow.
Yeah.
Um, so we have a couple more questions on connecting with readers on emotional level with non-fictional or educational content.
Mhm.
And I know that we talked about that a little bit, but I'd like to go back and talk about it just a little bit more. It seems
Mhm.
counterintuitive, especially for educational content, to create that emotional link with readers. How do you do that?
So my second book, The ABCs of Self-Love, is a self-love
Mhm.
primer. So it's very much educational content. And I had that same problem. How do I make this, a little bit sexier and not just like a self-help book? Um,
Right.
what what I did is I tried to be novel in my approach to a nonfiction format. So even though the foundation of the book was nonfiction, I also integrated exercises to make it interactive, and I incorporated little bits of poetry. And it doesn't even need to be poetry; it can be an inspirational quote. I think
Hmm.
make it easier to create that heart-mind connection in the content. But even if you're writing straight, this is, just to help you navigate something nonfiction content that doesn't have poetry or exercises. How you share it, how you show people the content outside of the book itself, I think is really powerful. So on social
Hmm.
media, taking little bits. And what I would do, for example, is I would take photographs of blocks of text, and then using, like Canva or Instagram, I would underline certain words, or make it like a graphical experience of the content, and then write
Hmm.
a caption where I reflected upon it. And maybe it became a little bit more of a memoir in the caption, so that I gave people some context that connected them to me, not just what I was teaching them about. And I think anytime you can create that human connection around what you've written, especially when it's nonfiction, it makes it more um, easy, resonant. It helps people feel
Hmm.
you as the author. And I think sometimes there's this pressure to separate yourself from the work, but I think that that gap is really closing now, especially in
Hmm.
2020. People want to know who they're buying from, whether it's a book or
Right.
anything else. So reflecting on your work on social media is a really great way to bridge that gap.
And I think we talked a little bit about branding, and to your point, this is all part of who you are and who your company is. But let's talk a little bit about the visual brand. You mentioned that just briefly. You mentioned that you have a color scheme that you use on social media so people can say that's yours when they see it. Can you talk a little bit about how you develop that?
So I think the best place to start is to create a mood board, to go on Pinterest and see, like, what pictures do I see here that speak to me? Which ones tug at me? And creating a
Hmm.
board that can encompass anything from like a landscape to a certain font that someone used in a graphic that you're just like, that feels right to me. And once you
Hmm.
have that mood board of all the different images and colors and styles, narrowing that down and committing. And this is something that I'm not as consistent with as I should be, and I'd like to work towards being more consistent. But for
Hmm.
example, packaging, I only use certain fonts. I only use literally certain shades of certain colors. It's very consistent. But then I get a little lazy sometimes on Instagram, and the pink is a little different or the font is a little different. The more consistent you can be, the more you're going to start establishing yourself as a presence that people can count
Hmm.
on. And so that's kind of my challenge to myself, is how can I create a little bit more continuity, because I know that that's what helps people feel safe. It builds trust. It manages expectations. So I think starting with a mood board, think about like what resonates with you, and then narrowing that down. I really think Canva is something anyone can learn. It's free, it's online, it has an app, it's super easy. Go on there and see if you can commit. Okay, moving forward, I'm only going to use these two fonts and these two colors, and I'm going to commit to posting one picture one day and one text-based like piece of content the other day, and just alternate picture,
Hmm.
typography, picture, typography. And within like 2, 3 weeks, if you do that, you'll have a holistic feed. And that is like
Hmm.
the first step. And then from there, what I would say is If you want to attract people, start researching your keyword strategy, try to include some hashtags in every post, and then go out into the Instagram wild and engage with other people's content. Use those same hashtags to find people who you might click with and leave them a nice comment. Give them a compliment, send them a message. There's an opportunity to do a giveaway together. That's one thing I did early on that was really great. I've, connected with other small businesses who had similar audiences, and we would do giveaways together. So you can do a book giveaway. You could do a candle giveaway if that's what the person sells. But if there's alignment in the audience, that's a great way to grow your audience organically without having to spend on ads.
So we've got like 2 minutes left. So I wanted to end with, what is your top tip for an author that's just getting started?
Don't stop. That is my top tip. When I couldn't get a publisher for my first book, if I had, put my pens away and closed my computer and just said, you know what, it turns out I'm not a writer. No one cared. I would have been here today. So my top tip is keep going. Keep going. And I'll leave you with a poem from Self-Love Poetry. It says, I found my rhythm when I realized even the steps backwards were part of the dance. And that's what we're all doing. We're dancing. So if you feel like you have a setback, know that that's just part of the dance, and keep dancing, keep writing, keep going. And if you need someone to support you, you can reach out to me on social media, and I would love to follow you, engage with you, use my audience to help grow yours. There are people out there who want to help you. I know I'm not the only one. So commit to your craft, keep going, build community, and let me know how I can help.
Thank you so much. By the way, your poem gave me goosebumps. Very touching. Thank you. But Melody, thank you so much for a very impassioning, there you go.
So this is important as an author. You have to promote yourself. This is my book, Self-Love Poetry. You can find it on Amazon. I would be so delighted if you would order a copy and also leave a review. As an author, don't be afraid to ask for reviews. It makes a huge difference. The reviews I've received from gracious people around the world have changed my life. So please, if you enjoyed this talk, pick up my book, reach out to me, leave a review, and keep writing.
Thank you so much. And for all of you, happy publishing.